He said it casually, between a sip of water and a glance at his phone. "You smell like old books." I laughed. Not a full laugh, just the kind you let out to keep things light. "Must be all the time I spend with them," I said, placing his mug down with a quiet clink. He didn't look up. I poured the tea, mine with lemon, his with honey, and we went on like always. But later, when the house settled into that golden hush it does in late autumn, I sat by the window and remembered the way he said it. The light came in through the curtains, soft and warm, catching little specks of dust in the air. They swirled, slowly, gently, like something searching. I could still hear him. The words weren't sharp, but they didn't need to be. They floated in my mind the same way the dust floated through the room, careless, drifting, oddly permanent. Like a bookmark left in the wrong chapter. Like being seen, but only halfway. I held my tea, still warm then, and breathed in the scent of cinnamon and lemon. But it didn't comfort me like it usually did. I wasn't hurt. Not quite. But I wasn't. Okay either. The green chair creaked a little when I sat down. It always had. But this time, it felt louder. The kind of loud that fills a quiet room. I pulled the throw blanket over my legs and opened the book on my lap, though I couldn't remember which page I'd left off on. I stared at the words without really reading, listening instead to the way the house moved around me, the soft tap of a tree branch on the window, the slow, steady ticking of the clock above the mantel, my own breath. Once this chair felt like a small kind of home. I used to read here while he sat across from me, sometimes talking, sometimes silent, but present. Now the cushion sagged in a way that didn't hug me. It felt too empty. Or maybe I did. I shifted my weight and tucked the blanket tighter, like that would somehow make it all fit again. But it didn't. The floor creaked down the hall, but he didn't come in. And I didn't call out. That chair used to feel like I belonged in it. Today, I felt like part of the furniture. The smell was familiar. Paper, leather, dust, and time. The scent I'd always loved, of libraries and quiet afternoons, of memory and meaning. But after what he said, it didn't sit the same. "You smell like old books." I took a slow breath and waited for the warmth I usually felt to settle in. My chest. It didn't. Instead, it felt like air passing through something hollow. I stood there by the shelf, eyes on the worn spines, and for the first time, it didn't feel like comfort. It felt like being overlooked. Or expired. The bathroom light buzzed, faintly when I flipped it on, that yellow kind of glow that shows everything and flatters nothing. I leaned forward over the sink, steam curling up from the tap. The mirror fogged a little, but not enough to hide the lines around my mouth, the places where my skin had softened with time. I noticed the gray at my roots. I'd meant to color it weeks ago, but kept saying, tomorrow. I stared longer than I should have. Once I saw those lines as stories, smiles, losses, long nights rocking colicky babies. But tonight, I wondered how he saw them. I wondered if he looked at me and saw the dust jackets in his comment, worn, faded, shelved. Wiped the edge of the mirror with a towel, clearing just enough to see my full face again. I looked tired. But I also looked like me, just a version he didn't seem to read anymore. The mug was warm when I carried it to the table, just the way he liked it. I made one for myself too, a little extra honey stirred in, the way I always had. I set them down on the table. The lamp above cast that soft golden circle, turning the steam into little curls of light. I waited. He said he'd be right there. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The tea stopped steaming. Mine had gone from hot to warm to tepid. I picked it up anyway and held it between both hands. I didn't drink it, I just held it. I think I needed the warmth more than the taste. I looked over at his cup. untouched. I used to believe the small things meant something. 2 cups of tea, a shared quiet, a place at the table. But tonight, it felt like a scene only I'd shown up for. I looked down at my hands, curled around that cooling mug, and thought, I miss being cherished. I miss being chosen in little ways. I took one sip, bitter now, like a page turned too late. The TV played softly down the hall, voices muffled beneath a commercial for something I couldn't name. I passed the doorway without stopping, slippers whispering across the hardwood, the kind of sound no one notices anymore. I reached the light switch in the kitchen and paused. My hand hovered. I remembered the words again. You smell like old books. And how I hadn't said a thing back. I didn't correct him. I didn't explain what old books meant to me, but in that pause before the lights clicked off, something in me shifted. Not anger, just clarity, the quiet kind, like a chapter ending without warning, and me deciding not to reread it. The room went dark behind me, and I didn't feel the need to look back. The couch gave a little squeak as I sat down, same as it always had. That familiar green corduroy, a little more faded now, still held the shape of us. I ran my hand across the cushion beside me. It used to be his spot, always. We used to sit close, knees touching if the blanket was small enough. I'd read while he leaned in, stealing bites of my lemon bar like it was a game we never had to explain. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, and even that silence felt like love. Now it's just space. Empty space that used to hold laughter, comments about characters, or quiet signs when a story got sad. I still sit in my corner, legs tucked, book in hand. But I feel the distance more than I ever used to. I reached over to the little side table and straightened the doily. It was silly, I guess, but it made me feel like I was still part of something shared. The room smelled faintly of lemon and linen, like the ghost of old Sundays. I stayed there, flipping pages I couldn't focus on, listening to a silence that felt more hollow than whole. I used to love the way he read out loud. His voice was steady, just a touch of gravel, like the kind of voice you want narrating mysteries. He always paused at the same kind of spots, right before the twist. Who do you think did it? He'd ask, raising an eyebrow like he already knew I had a theory. I'm not sure yet, I'd lie, just to make him keep reading. We did that every weekend, tucked into that old couch with a blanket draped over our laps and lemon bars balanced on napkins. Spring breeze drifting through the window, the mantel clock ticking just enough to remind us time was moving, but not fast. Then one day, I realized he'd stopped asking. Not because we solved the mystery, but because the book had closed somewhere, and I hadn't noticed when. Now I sit there with an open book and no questions from him, just the rustle of pages and the porch door creaking a little in the wind. Still pretend I don't know who did it. But now I pretend to be alone. I saw his book by the kitchen window, still closed, spine facing out. The one he started but never finished. I picked it up gently and flipped to the page where he'd last stopped. I folded the corner softly, not too sharp, just enough to guide him back. I set his reading glasses on top, like I always did. It was a habit by now. Hope wrapped in small motions, but every day the book stayed right there, unopened, untouched. It turns out love waits quietly, sometimes too quietly. We still sat together on Sundays, side by side on that same couch, same books in our laps. But something had changed. He stared down at his phone, thumb scrolling, eyes never quite landing on mine. His book lay open, but untouched. Mine trembled in my hands, though I tried not to show it. I used to love the quiet between us. It used to feel like belonging. Now it felt like space, heavy and cold. A fly buzzed at the window, tapping against the glass like it wanted out. Outside, a lawnmower hummed in the distance, someone else's day unfolding, not mine. not hours. Looked over at him, hoping he'd glance up, maybe offer a smile, a comment, something. But his eyes never left the screen. I lowered my gaze, turned a page. I wasn't reading anymore. I was just holding on, and that silence? It wasn't peace. It was a goodbye that hadn't been said out loud. I kept reading, but not for him anymore. Just for me. The pages made their soft little sounds, whispers, really. I let them fall into the room like I used to when he cared to, ask about the plot. Every now and then, I'd chuckle or sigh, hoping he'd glance up, maybe say, "What part are you at?" But nothing came. His chair stayed still. His attention somewhere else. I pressed my finger against the page, holding it open like I always did, even though no one was listening. The tea beside me had gone lukewarm. I sipped it anyway. Outside, the shadows stretched longer, reaching across, the floor like a soft reminder that time was moving on. Even if we weren't, I kept reading, keep pretending. But it felt like telling stories into a jar with the lid on tight. Sunday used to feel special. I'd wake up with something to look forward to, books, coffee, his company, and lemon bars fresh from the oven. Now the day just showed up. No sparkle, no warmth. I still baked the lemon bars, habit, I suppose, set them on a plate just like before, but they stayed untouched. He didn't even glance at them. The house was quiet, not with peace, but with absence. Like a page, had turned itself without asking me if I was ready. I stood at the counter, breathing in the sugar and lemon scent, and thought, we're still in the same house, but we're not in the same chapter anymore. I basted it just the way he liked, rosemary under the skin, a splash of red wine in the roasting pan. He always said that brought out the flavor. The oven gave off that warm, familiar scent, a mix of garlic and thyme, and for a moment it felt like tradition again, like love with an aroma. I lit a single candle in the middle of the table, more for habit than anything else. The porcelain plates caught its glow, soft and golden. Evening shadows stretched across the kitchen floor, gentle and long. "Dinner's ready," I said, setting his plate down in front of him. He didn't look up, just mumbled, "Thanks," eyes still glued to his phone. His thumb moved, scrolling and tapping, face lit up in that faint blue glow. I sat across from him, folding my napkin into my lap. The chicken was tender, juicy, just like I'd hoped. But I barely tasted it. Every bite was met with silence so thick it felt like I was eating in a stranger's home. I reached for my wine glass, took a small sip, and watched the way the candle flickered between us. The meal was warm. But the silence was colder than I'd ever known. He smiled down at his phone, just for a second, that soft, half-laugh kind of smile. I hadn't seen him do that with me in a long while. I glanced up from my plate, watching him scroll, quick flicks of his thumb, pausing on photos, tapping the screen. It wasn't the scrolling that hurt. It was the connection he seemed to find there, out there in the world where I didn't seem to exist anymore. I kept eating. Slow, careful bites. Chicken, a little mashed potato. But with each chew, my fork grew heavier. The food didn't taste like anything now. I watched him lean back slightly, still smiling faintly at whatever conversation he was caught up in. I looked at my own phone, face down on the table, untouched. The chair creaked softly as I shifted, trying not to feel it all. The glow from his screen lit his features more than the candlelight did. And that night, I felt more like wallpaper than a woman he once loved. I had stories, not big ones, just the kind that belonged to an ordinary day. A recipe I saw in a magazine. Mrs. Kenner from next door finally painted her shutters blue. A strange dream about my mother I couldn't quite explain. I waited for him to ask. He used to ask. Instead, we sat in silence, the candle burning down, low, its wax leaning to one side. His wine glass sat half full, just like mine. Neither of us reached for them. I picked up my fork, then set it down. He didn't notice. I used to think maybe he was just tired, maybe distracted. But tonight I knew. It wasn't a distraction. It was far away. And the space where conversation used to live had closed itself quietly without warning. I glanced at the clock. The ticking felt too loud. I thought of all the words I hadn't said, not because I didn't have them, but because there wasn't room for them anymore. So I kept them to myself. Folded them like laundry I knew no one would wear. I folded the napkin once, then again, a triangle, a little square, a sort of crane, though the wings kept falling in. I don't know why I did it. Maybe to keep my hands busy. Maybe to feel like I was making something, anything, out of the quiet. His fork scraped the plate. Mine sat untouched now. The light from the lamp cast long shadows across the table, soft and slow. A small draft came in from the window, lifting, the edge of the napkin beside my wrist. It fluttered like it wanted to leave, too. I stared at the shape I'd made. It wasn't pretty, but it was mine, and it was the only thing on the table that looked like it had been touched with care. I finally said something, just one line. "I think the roast turned out well tonight." He nodded. "Yeah, good." That was it. He didn't look up, didn't ask how I'd done it, didn't say thank you, just went on scrolling, the glow of the screen painting his face. In quiet blue, I looked down at my plate. Bare bones now, just like the feeling between us. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was worse than that. It was that he didn't even notice I'd spoken at all. And in that flickering half-darkness, I felt the echo of myself disappear. I was rinsing my mug when my phone lit up on the counter. I almost ignored it. Most calls. These days are spam or appointment reminders, but something made me look twice. Mara. I hadn't seen her name in decades. It blinked at me like a memory asking for tea. My hand trembled just a bit as I dried it on the dish towel. I hesitated, then tapped, "Accept." "Hello?" I said, unsure if it was really her. "Is this still Eleanor Morris?" she asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Mara." My own voice cracked on her name. "Still you," she laughed. And the sound was like wind through trees I hadn't walked under in years. Her voice was older, sure, a little slower, but still familiar, like a poem I once knew by heart. We both laughed for no reason at all, just the kind of laugh that fills space when two people remember who they used to be. "I can't believe it's you," I said. "I was thinking about that dorm room with the crooked closet door, and your lemon tea obsession." My smile widened. The kitchen smelled like lilacs from the garden. The fridge hummed in the background. But all I heard was her voice, and it felt like spring had stepped inside. She told me she'd found a box of our old letters, little notes, scribbled poems, fragments of thoughts we used to share between classes. "Do you still write?" she asked, soft and curious. I paused. "Not really," I said. Then I looked at the notebook sitting on my table, the one I kept nearby just in case. "Eleanor," she said, teasing, "you used to scribble sonnets on the backs of napkins. I still have some of those," I admitted, smiling into the phone. "Well, the world probably still needs your words. I know I do." The breeze lifted the corner of a magazine on the table, flipping a page like it agreed with her. I glanced at the notebook again, pen uncapped, waiting. That question, "Do you still write?" sat in my chest longer than it should've. It didn't ache. It glowed, like someone had found a light switch I forgot was there. I didn't say yes out loud. But something inside me nodded, like maybe I was ready to begin again. We talked for an hour, maybe more. I didn't check the clock. She told me about her grandkids, how one of them had just started painting, another obsessed with dinosaurs. I told her about my hydrangeas and how the soil here makes them pink, whether I want it to or not. "You still have that terrible luck with dirt," she said, and we both laughed. We talked about Professor Bloom, how he always smelled like old coffee and chalk, and how he made us believe our thoughts mattered. It felt good to remember someone who once made me feel like I was more than a quiet girl with too many ideas. The coffee in my mug had gone cold by then, but I didn't care. She told me her joints ache now. I told her my knees creak like floorboards. Growing. Older is just a long conversation with gravity, she said. I laughed until I nearly spilled what was left of my coffee. That call stitched something back together in me. Something I didn't know was still waiting to be mended. It felt like I'd pulled a warm blanket from the attic and finally remembered how good it was to wrap around my shoulders. After we hung up, I stood there a moment, phone still in my hand. The quiet, pressing in gently, not heavy, just soft. Then I walked over to the hallway drawer. It stuck a little, like it always did. I tugged, and it groaned open, slow, wooden, like it remembered me too. Inside were the old notebooks. Spiral-bound, pages crinkled, some yellowed with time, loose papers with lines of half-thought poems, a few envelopes, never mailed. I reached in and pulled one out. The scent of old paper, ink, and something warm rose up, like memory with a heartbeat. I traced my fingers along the edge of the first page. I'd always written small, tucked my feelings into corners like I didn't want them seen too soon, and for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. I didn't think, "You used to be better." I just thought, this was mine. Still is. I sat down slowly, notebook in hand. The dust motes danced in the light near the window, and all I could think was, I want to write again, even if it's just for me. I opened the notebook, pen in hand. The window beside me was wide open, the breeze soft but certain, like it knew it was welcome. The page stared back, blank and unbothered. I wrote one sentence, then another. The words came slowly, like shy guests at a long empty table. I didn't try to be clever. I didn't reach for anything grand. I just wrote what I felt, what I saw. The sound of the pen moving across paper, soft, rhythmic, was the loveliest sound I'd heard in weeks. Outside, wind chimes played a scattered little song. Each note felt like a kind of punctuation, like something agreeing with me from a distance. My shoulders softened. My chest let out a breath I didn't know it was holding. Line by line, something loosened inside me, something knotted too long. I didn't care what it became. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be true. And it was. Every word. I hadn't been silenced. I'd just gone quiet for a while. Now I was ready to listen to myself again. The first time I walked into the community room at the library, I felt like a misprint, like I didn't quite belong on the same shelf as everyone else. I clutched my notebook tighter than I needed to and took a quiet seat near the back. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, catching flecks of dust in the air like tiny dancers. The scent of floor polish and old books wrapped around me. Vanilla and cedar, paper, and time. It reminded me of college libraries, of being 19 and brave with a pen. I didn't say much that day, just listened. Their voices rose and fell like a gentle tide, some nervous, some sure. But each one shared something. A poem, a page, a thought that had once lived in secret. And even though I stayed silent, something in me leaned forward. The wooden chairs creaked every time someone shifted, and the clock above the door ticked softly, as if it too was waiting for words. No one asked me to read, but no one ignored me either. That mattered more than I expected. I didn't speak that day, but I came back the next week because somehow the library smelled like belonging. I was next. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the words on my page. My hands shook as I unfolded the paper, the corners bending where I'd gripped them too tight. "Take your time," someone said gently. I didn't look up to see who it was. I took a breath. The words came out slow at first, my voice thin, like it hadn't been used in too long. But the room was still. Not stiff, just waiting. Not silent, just listening. I hadn't read my own writing aloud in years, not since, well, long enough to forget what it felt like to be heard without being interrupted, or corrected, or dismissed. The folding chairs creaked slightly as someone leaned in. I caught a soft nod from a woman across the circle. A man scribbled something into his notebook. I kept going. Each word felt like stitching something back together. By the time I finished, my hands had stopped shaking. I looked up, finally. No. Applause. Just warm eyes, soft smiles. And that was more than enough. It sat near the back window, half hidden behind a stack of forgotten binders, an old black typewriter, dust clinging to its keys. I reached out one afternoon and brushed it off, slow and gentle. The metal was cool under my fingertips, the ribbon dried out but still faintly red. Just for fun, I slid in a sheet of paper and typed my name, Eleanor. The keys stuck slightly on the O, but it still came through. Letters etched in ink, just a little crooked. But mine. It felt solid, real. I looked at it for a long moment and thought, maybe I still had something worth saying. When the library coordinator asked if I'd consider leading one of the writing sessions, I almost said no. I haven't taught in years, I told her, folding my hands in my lap. But you listen like someone who remembers, she said. That stuck with me. I thought of Mara's voice on the phone, how she believed I still had something to give. So I said yes. Quietly, but yes. That first afternoon, I stood at the head of the table with a folder in hand, surrounded by nervous smiles and unsure eyes. Young people, retired teachers, a woman who whispered she hadn't written since her husband passed. We read prompts, shared first lines, scribbled half-truths in the margins of loose-leaf paper. Say what you mean, I told them. Then say what you're afraid to mean. They laughed, not loudly, but together. One man raised his hand. Is it okay if we don't get it right? The first time? I smiled. It's only wrong if you don't say it. And in that moment, I realized I'd become someone others leaned on. Not because I had all the answers, but because I remembered how to listen. Every week I showed up. Same seat, same notebook, same cup of tea from the tiny library kitchen that always tasted faintly of cardboard and comfort. I didn't rush my words anymore. I let them come when they wanted, and when they didn't, I waited without judgment. Slowly, I stopped editing myself out. A sentence here, a paragraph there, sometimes a whole page. Not always polished, but honest. And one day, tucked into the newsletter by the front desk, I saw it. Spring Voices, a community collection. My name, printed there on the contributor list. The librarian handed me my copy. The cover was simple. The pages warm from the copier. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was mine. I held it to my chest for a moment, not out of pride, out of peace, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just writing again. I had found my paragraph, and I was ready to keep turning pages. The first time I saw him standing by the door, I figured it was nothing. Maybe he was waiting for someone else. I gathered my things slowly, one hand on the strap of my bag, the other smoothing the edges of my papers. He gave a soft nod, held the door, and we stepped out into the dusky air together. By the third time, I stopped pretending it was a coincidence. Didn't rush me. Didn't fill the silence with small talk. Just walked beside me, slow and steady, like we had nowhere urgent to be. The fallen leaves rustled gently beneath our feet, and the scent of fresh rain still lingered in the air, sweet. And earthy. Are you heading home? He asked. You? I glanced over. He shrugged. Eventually. There was no pressure, no reason, no formality, just presence. a kind one. We reached my car, and he smiled softly. "See you next week?" "Yes," I said. "See you then." And somehow, the words felt like a promise. He didn't wait out of duty. He waited like it was the most natural thing in the world, like kindness didn't need a reason to show up at your side. It was after one of the workshops. The others had already packed up, their voices trailing off down the hallway. I stayed behind, a moment longer, tucking my notebook into my bag. "You always say the real stuff," Ben said, leaning against the doorway. I paused. "The real stuff?" He nodded. "The kind that doesn't sound like writing. It just sounds like truth." I didn't know what to say. My eyes prickled unexpectedly. I looked down at my shoes. "I mean that in a good way," he added quickly, a little flustered. "It's why people lean in when you read." I smiled, soft and surprised. "Thank you, Ben." The chill of the evening brushed across my face as we stepped outside. The library windows behind us glowed like warm lanterns, and his words still hovered in the air. Gentle, sincere, like bookmarks settling in a favorite chapter. I wasn't used to being seen that way. Not anymore, especially not by someone who hadn't known me in my younger pages, but somehow he saw through all the quiet, and that kind of seeing, it meant more than I knew how to say out loud. The sidewalk was bathed in gold, long shadows, stretching out in front of us like soft reminders of the day we'd just walked through. Ben walked beside me, hands in his pockets, his steps careful but unhurried. I wasn't used to this, being seen without being looked through. With him, I didn't feel elderly. I felt curated, like a well-loved book that someone still wanted to read. "Do you ever feel like your best work is behind you?" I asked, the words tumbling out without warning. He glanced at me, thoughtful. "I think your best work is the one you believe in enough to write next." I didn't reply right away. The gravel crunched softly under our shoes, and in the distance, a car passed by slowly, headlights low and unbothered. There was a quiet reverence in how he walked beside me. Not holding me up, not slowing down, just there, with me. And in that stillness, I felt something in me reshelve itself, not filed away, not forgotten, just found it again, like someone had dusted off the spine of me and gently placed me back, where I belonged. We'd only gone a few steps when he asked, "Who's your favorite character you've ever written?" I blinked at him. No one had asked me that in years. "Her name was Lila," I said slowly. "She owned a small antique shop, wore her grief like a shawl, but still remembered how to dance." He smiled. "Why her?" That stopped me. Most people just nodded, maybe, said nice, and moved on. But Ben asked why. Not for praise, for understanding. She was the first character I ever let grieve without fixing her. I let her just be. He nodded, eyes on the sidewalk. "That's why she sticks." The breeze tugged lightly at the collar of my jacket. The sky was still glowing, fading into oranges and purples, and the air smelled faintly of leaves and something sweet, maybe a cinnamon bun from the bakery across the street. I looked at him, and I knew. He wasn't just listening to what I said. He was listening to what I meant, and that kind of listening. That's how people love stories, and how sometimes they love people too. I used to be the first one packed, ready to go, but lately I lingered. Straightened papers that didn't need straightening, tied my scarf a little slower, pretended I couldn't find my pen, just to buy a minute or two, because I liked walking. Beside him. Our footsteps always fell into sync, like we shared the same pace without planning it. We didn't rush the silence between us. Let it stretch, like a line we were both willing to follow. "Cold tonight," he said. But not bitter," I replied. We reached the edge of the parking lot. Lamplight spilled across the pavement, soft and golden. My car waited. So did he, but we didn't hurry. "You know," he said, "you tell stories the way people wish they remembered things." I smiled, warmed more by that than my coat. You listen like someone who's never in a hurry to leave the page. Some nights I walked slower, just so it could last a little longer, not because we were the same age, but because we both believed in the power of a good ending. He shuffled through the stack of mail like he always did. Quick, careless, more muscle memory than interest. The soft rattle of envelopes tapped against the table, one by one, until his hand landed on the first paper. Right on top. The receipt. I hadn't put it there on purpose. Not exactly. But I also hadn't buried it. He squinted at the small print, held it up in the gray afternoon light bleeding through the kitchen window. The smell of reheated coffee and stale dust hung in the air like an old sigh. "What's this?" he asked, raising one eyebrow, like I'd mailed in for a prize I didn't deserve. I dried my hands on a towel and turned toward him. He read aloud slowly, the way people do when they're trying to mock something without quite understanding it. Donation receipt, vehicle transfer, Eleanor Morris, Library Foundation? The smirk curled before I could answer. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to, but I watched him. Calm. Quiet. That single paper meant almost nothing to him, but it meant something to me. Something big. "You gave it to the library?" He said it like I'd handed over the keys to a spaceship. Like it was absurd, hilarious even. His voice cut through the stillness of the kitchen like a misplaced joke. I didn't flinch. I watched him raise his eyebrows the way people do when they think you've done something naive. Foolish, sentimental in the worst way. The cracked window let in a soft draft, and the chill crept under the hem of my sweater. Outside, I could hear the faint rustle of dry leaves scraping across the porch. Inside, silence filled in the space where curiosity might have lived. I moved toward the coffee pot, saw the one from earlier still sitting in the sink, cold, soaking, forgotten, like the feeling between us, left unspoken, untouched. "It's a library," he said, still shaking his head. "Who even does that?" I didn't respond. Not yet. I just looked at him and thought, he doesn't understand. He never really did. And for the first time, I didn't feel like explaining why he should. He dropped the receipt on the counter, like it was nothing. "Sentimental nonsense," he muttered, grabbing his mug. That phrase hit the air like a dish cracking against tile. Sharp, casual, dismissive. I let it pass. The kitchen was dim, the single light overhead humming above the clutter, unopened bills, receipts, crumbs from toast he hadn't cleaned up. The fridge made that low, tired sound it always did. A steady hum, indifferent to everything around it. He didn't know. He didn't know what that car had become to me over the years. How many drives I took alone in it, just to breathe. How many nights I sat behind the wheel in the garage because it was the only space that didn't expect anything from me. That car wasn't sentimental. It was survival. It was a symbol of everything he ignored. Every silence. Every absence dressed up as normal. So no. Donating it wasn't sentimental. It was deliberate. The most unsentimental thing I'd done in years, and the most honest. I sat at the table and wrapped both hands around my chipped blue mug. The coffee was bitter now, lukewarm and thin, but I took a sip anyway. He looked at me like he was waiting for a reaction, waiting for me to argue, to backtrack, to soften the sharp edge of what I'd done. But I didn't. I didn't defend myself, not this time. I looked right back at him, steady, quiet. And in that silence, I think he realized I wasn't asking him to understand anymore. Wasn't seeking permission or a nod or a kind word. The low light cast long shadows across the floor. The clock ticked above us, each second stretching like thread pulled too tight. I took another sip. Steam rose slowly from the mug, curling into the air like something exhaled. That moment wasn't about the car. It was about every sentence I never finished, Every yes I gave when I wanted to say no. Every version of me he never asked to know, and for once I said nothing, because nothing was enough. He laughed, that quick, dismissive kind of laugh, half surprised, half smug, like I'd just told him I'd named a goldfish after Hemingway. "You really did it," he said. "You actually gave it away." I didn't say a word. The laugh echoed against the bare kitchen walls, louder than it should have been, louder than it deserved to be. I stood by the counter, one hand resting on the cool tile. I felt the cold sink into my palm, grounding me. His laughter faded when he realized I wasn't joining him. "You're serious?" he asked, blinking. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The kitchen felt like it wasn't moving. The afternoon had stopped. Even the refrigerator had gone still for a moment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was done. The car was gone, and with it, a weight I'd carried far too long. A silence I'd sat in for years. He thought I'd done something foolish. But I knew what I'd really done. I'd freed myself, and that truth didn't need a laugh. It just needed to last. Ben stepped up to the microphone, tapping it gently. The soft hum of conversation tapered off, like a curtain drawing itself closed. Fairy lights twinkled along the tops of the bookcases, and the room seemed to take a breath, together. He cleared his throat and smiled. "Tonight, please welcome Eleanor Morris." My name filled the space, not loud, not booming, but full like a bell rung gently but clearly, like it mattered. For a long time, my name had been something whispered across grocery counters or scribbled at the bottom of forms. But hearing him say it like that, steady, respectful, warm, it felt like coming home to myself. There was a light applause, not thunderous, no standing ovation, but it was kind, familiar, the kind of applause that feels like being wrapped in a soft quilt. I walked toward the front, heart fluttering but not afraid. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward. A wine glass clinked somewhere in the back. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like someone was filling time. I felt like someone they were here for. My name sounded whole again. Not just mine, but mine and worth saying out loud. The lamp above the podium cast a warm circle on the lectern. I opened my book and felt the pages fall into place without effort. My hands didn't shake this time. They held steady, soft but certain. Looked down at the words I had written, not just sentences, not just stories, pieces of breath, really, of memory. I had revised each one gently, like smoothing wrinkles out of linen. And now, it was time to read them as they were meant to be heard. I didn't whisper. I didn't hesitate. "Page 42, I said softly. A piece called After the Last Cup of Tea. My voice moved into the air like it belonged there. The wood-paneled walls didn't echo, they cradled every syllable. The scent of fresh-cut flowers drifted from a vase nearby, mixing with the faint mustiness of old books and clean paper. No one shuffled. No one coughed. The air stood still, like it was even listening. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to give that didn't need approval, just presence. I wasn't proving anything. I was simply reading. By the third paragraph, I felt it. The room had leaned in, not forward in their seats, but inward, with their attention, their breath. One woman tilted her head slightly. A man near the back closed his eyes, not in boredom, but in deep listening. Hadn't meant to hold them like this. I was just telling the truth, not a polished truth, not the kind with clever turns or dramatic pauses, just honest, steady words. I read about the teacup I hadn't washed after my mother died. I read about the garden hose left running one summer when I forgot what day it was. Small things, but real. And somehow, the more I said, the more I could feel them hearing not just the story, but the spaces between it. the quiet parts, the ache I never wrote directly, but they found it anyway. The fairy lights above glimmered gently. Some caught the rims of eyeglasses. Others reflected in still teacups. I didn't feel like a performer. I felt like music someone had been waiting to remember. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't alone in what I'd carried. Through the tall windows by the library doors, I saw it. His old convertible, clean now, polished, sitting under the lamplight like it had been waiting for this. The hood gleamed slightly in the dusk. Spring air had settled into that soft middle place between warm and cool. And across the windshield, the library had placed a small white sign, "Donated in memory of untold stories." I stood at the glass for a moment, my hand resting on the wooden frame. It didn't hurt, not like I thought it would. That car had once been a cage, a placeholder, a space where I hid more than I drove. But now it has a purpose, a story. I smiled, not out of spite, not even vindication, gratitude. Because something once overlooked had been turned into something seen, something useful, something kind. People passed it on their way in, a few stopping to read the sign. Most moved on. That was fine. They didn't have to know its whole history. I did. And that was enough. The last word left my mouth, and for a beat, the room stayed quiet. Then came the applause, not loud, but deep, steady, the kind that starts slow and stays warm, all the way through. I closed the book gently, like tucking a child into bed. My hands rested on the cover for just a second longer than needed. And then I stood. I walked back to my seat, the soles of my shoes whispering against the hardwood. Chairs shifted slightly as people moved to make room. My shoulders relaxed. My breath came easily. Someone handed me a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. Chamomile. Still warm. I sat down beside it and placed my book on the arm of the chair. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like something waiting to be edited. It felt finished, heard, believed. I looked around the room, soft lights, flickering candles, gentle smiles. I wasn't just a guest at this table. I had earned my seat, and I knew I belonged. The light arrived gently today. It crept in like a dear friend, quiet, unhurried, spilling across the floor in soft golden ribbons. The kind of morning light that doesn't ask anything of you. It just shows up, warm and calm. I settled into my old reading chair, the one that sags a little to the left. I never fixed it. Some things don't need fixing. They just need to be understood. The rug beneath my feet felt cool through my slippers. The scent of chamomile and worn linen still lingered in the room from last night, like a comfort that hadn't faded with sleep. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't check the time. I just breathed in the stillness, letting it wrap around me like a second blanket. Outside, the birds began to stir, one calling, then another. A soft chorus of waking. I didn't have anything urgent to do, and for once, that didn't make me feel behind. It made me feel present. I watched the sunlight stretch over the bookshelves, over the teacup I'd left behind, over the stories that had waited for me to return, and in that hush, I felt it, peace, the kind that doesn't rush you, just let you be. I reached for an old favorite. The book sat on the middle shelf, right where I always kept it. The spine was soft now, the title nearly rubbed off from years of touch. The cover was creased, corners curled like old letters folded and unfolded too many times. My fingers knew the shape of it without thinking. It opened to the exact page I needed, not the one I last marked, but the one that remembered me better. Then I remembered it. Dust motes floated in the morning light, like quiet thoughts waiting their turn. I rested the book on my lap, thumb brushing against a line I used to reread often. It still made my chest ache in the gentlest way. The kind of ache that reminds you you're still alive. still here. The room smelled of rose oil from the sachet tucked in the drawer, faint and familiar. I didn't have to explain myself to these books. I never did. In this corner, with these pages, I was never too much or too quiet. I was simply known. He used to tease me for it, said the books I loved smelled like basements and forgotten closets. "They're old," he'd say, scrunching his nose. "You really like that?" I did. To him, they were just paper. Dusty, wrinkled, worn. But to me, they were marked with meaning. Lived in, underlined. Their spines had softened from being held too long on the same page. Their margins told stories he never thought to read. Some people only skim the surface. I made the footnotes. Of ink-stained pauses and scribbled thoughts, in the back covers. I never needed a book to be pristine. I needed it to be real. The breeze nudged the curtain near the open window, and I let it brush across my shoulder. A book closed in my lap with a soft thump. Beside me, my teacup sat untouched, cool now, but still fragrant. I looked down at the folded napkin, the way it creased like an unread letter, and I realized he never saw the beauty in what had been. Touched and trusted, but I did, because I had been to those pages. There was a time I thought the story might come back around, that he'd pick up the thread, that he'd remember where we left off and want to read more. But I stopped waiting. I've written enough since then. Pages of quiet healing, of choosing peace over apology, of becoming someone who doesn't need her story understood to believe in it. The sun has fully risen now, warming the shelves, painting the floorboards in soft gold. The clock ticks in its corner, calm and unhurried. Somewhere in the other room, toast is browning slowly, the scent drifting in like a promise that the day will be kind. I don't need him to read these chapters. I don't need a sequel to make this story whole. Not every book needs to be continued. Some are better left closed, resting gently on the shelf with the ones we've outgrown. And mine? Mine is still being written, with steady hands and no audience in mind. Just the quiet truth that I am the author of my piece. I still love the smell of old books. Not because they're old, but because they've been lived in, held, read, trusted. They've been bent open in moments of joy, cried over in rooms that no longer exist, passed from hand to hand like secrets wrapped in paper. That's where the beauty is, not in the gloss, but in the wear. It's in the lines rubbed away from too much love, the stains from teacups, the faint pencil notes left behind by someone who needed to feel seen. I pulled the soft blanket higher over my lap, the light now pouring in full through the window. It landed across the floor like honey. No music playing, no voices in the background, just stillness. Full, quiet, whole. And I saw it clearly, maybe for the first time. I'm one of those stories too. Not flashy. Not new, but I lived in, a little worn at the edges, a little creased in the middle, but held, underlined, loved, and finally, enough. If you've ever felt like one of those well-loved pages, creased, quiet, but still full of meaning, I'd be honored to sit with your story too. You're welcome to subscribe if you'd like to hear more, and if there's a chapter from your life you've been holding close, I hope you'll share it below.